All right, welcome back to regularly scheduled programming of Never Better Pod. We're back to our routine here. So, how's it going?
We sure are, man. Yeah. Hey, so I am a little bit late. I just had an amazing coffee date with your mom.
So jealous. That's fun. I'm jealous of both of
Yeah,
you.
it was awesome. We had a really great catch up, and obviously we talked about the podcast a lot. And yeah, we even got a little bit deep. Talked about our
Nice.
current geopolitical landscape and therapy a little bit. And your mom passed on the Christmas gift that you got for Layla, Alba, and I. And I'm stoked to. Hey, I should just why don't I just open it up right now? We'll show everyone what you got me.
Yeah, go for it.
Amazing. Hey, look at this. This is a nice wrapping paper. Oh, this is for Alba.
hmm You can do the little ASMR like thingy.
Dude, unreal. Oh my God. So this is both bubbly and cannabis themed. Doggy Wana, sparkling wine. My God.
I thought that was pretty on point.
Yes. Do you think that the catnip type stuff that's attached here actually works for dogs?
Dude, I have no idea. That's the first time I've seen it, but it was too
My God.
funny to ignore.
Okay. Well, this is too exciting. We have to test this on air right now. So
Product review.
I need you. Yeah.
Maybe this podcast will just pivot to a review of dog
Reviewing
toys.
dog product. Yeah. So here's the champagne bottle dog toy, and here's the little zipper here. So you're supposed to open the zipper and then put in the dog iguana, and then Alba's right behind me, so I'll give it to her. Oh my God. It smells like tea. If this was actually weed, looks like some really crazy bush weed. So much fun. Okay. All right. So I packed the dog toy with Bud.
Well, like the dust coming out of it looked like smoke for a second.
Yeah. Okay. It's all sealed up. Hey, Alba, come here. Are you in the frame? There you are. I think it's a success. I'd say she likes it.
That's so
Okay.
funny.
What else do we got in here? I don't see any of these labeled Anthony.
Yeah, they're literally all for your dog.
I know. I knew that. I expected it. So this is where Sarah's knitting comes into play. Hey, this is the dog bandana.
Yeah, sewing.
Sewing, yeah.
That ended up being her favorite one in the end. So Alba's very, very lucky.
Amazing. It's a really cute color scheme. She will wear this proudly. And I'm really glad to hear that it wasn't the dog toy that Sarah made, because I was thinking like, well, bless her heart, she sewed some dog toy that Alba's going to destroy in about 10 seconds. But
She was really
amazing.
smart
This
with
is great.
the connection on there because obviously we weren't sure how big Alba's like neck will be. So ideally you tie it around once and then snap the two snaps together. But worst case scenario, you can just go snaps or you can like double tie and snap. So it's
Yeah,
really smart design.
I think it's going to be perfect.
Nice.
I'm surprised at how big Alba's gotten. And I
Mm,
think she had like a later in life growth spurt. Like she went from this tiny little puppy that I carried in one arm all around Kelowna that summer to, yeah, 50 pounds. And if she was covered in a big furry coat like my last dog, Dura, she would have been bigger than him for sure,
hmm
which is crazy to think about.
Yeah, I think she ended up like pretty close in size to Lou. Maybe not quite as chunky as Lou. I think she's a little bit more of a lean
Yeah, yeah.
feminine look. But
Yes. So you chose the topic this week. What are we talking about? What are you going to teach me about? I want to learn.
it'll be an interesting one. It's something that I've kind of like brought up in the podcast previously, hinted at some of the details, but never really done a deep dive into it. So we're going to talk about my experience with long COVID this last year and the kind of mental health journey in dealing with that. I might touch on slightly a little bit of some like stats and details and stuff, but mostly I wanted to talk about my specific experiences and kind of ranging from the initial COVID infection to the lingering symptoms to the kind of increase in severity, breakdown, diagnosis, recovery, all that kind of stuff. Basically, in some ways to shine a light on anyone that might be also suffering with like what we call like an invisible illness. Like looking at me, you can't tell that I'm sick. I'm not like missing an arm or in a wheelchair or something, which can bring its own challenges just in dealing with life and society, to potentially anyone dealing with any other symptoms that they're not sure about, think they might be linked to a COVID infection, and potentially long COVID. Maybe this will provide you with some bit more anecdotal information on kind of what I've been through and what's worked for me, or just anyone looking to kind of gain a fresh perspective on. It's obviously something we've seen about online, hear about on the news or whatever. You hear this mention of long COVID sometimes, but do we know what it really means? So that's kind of what I want to jump into today. So yeah, big one.
Good, man. That is a big one. And I'm particularly interested in learning more about this because I definitely need to be more compassionate in this category. I have a bit of a tendency to kind of dismiss these claims, which is obviously not cool and considerate or right. So set me straight.
Yeah. And I think the thing for me, as I kind of mentioned, is whether or not it's actually long COVID or any of these other kind of related autoimmune sort of things that are invisible illnesses. Something just to remember when you're engaging with people in society, or an example like we've talked about before, why somebody might be choosing not to drink alcohol, right? You don't know if there's something going on medically that they don't necessarily feel comfortable sharing with you that would dictate their reason for not wanting to drink. So how that impacts how you interact with people and understand them a little bit better. Hopefully this will have a positive impact on that. So
yeah. So more compassionate overall.
Exactly. I'm just going to grab something here. It's, as you know, it's been a bit of a nightmare to edit these podcasts because I've been saying like a lot. So I made this sticky note that says, don't say like. It's a really bad habit and trying to get out of it. So I just remembered it was there. I got to put it in view.
Yeah. So what I noticed with you more than like is,
Yes. Yeah. Weird, just grammatical habits that I've gotten into. I'm not sure why.
It's just that your brain, you're so smart, your brain moves faster than your mouth. That's all.
Maybe. Yeah, it's a good
So
point.
it's just
Slow down a little
you're verbalizing the lag.
Yeah. True. I'll take it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess we can jump right in. The first thing I want to do is go through my experiences over really the last year plus. So starting off with, and I apologize, I will try and leave breaks in here if you want to jump in at any time. There's obviously a lot of information. This section might in some ways be kind of boring for people, but I'm going to try to go through it as fast as I can because I think it is necessary to have the discussion just to understand what's gone on over the last year. So I will rip through it as quickly as possible. Starting off with this most recent COVID infection, I tested positive on December 3rd of 2023. Initially, my symptoms were pretty mild, but suffered from some lingering fatigue and stuff for about 3 months, but kind of took it easy, gave my body a chance to recover as best as possible. But ended up not really recovering. I should mention at this point, I did have one definite previous infection in June of 2022, and then another likely one in March of 2020. That was kind of before we had regular testing and stuff. I do suspect that was COVID, but don't know for sure and probably will never know. I was vaccinated for COVID 4 times in April, June, and December of 2021, and then again in October of 2022. So there was a year and 2 months between my most recent vaccination and testing positive with this most recent occurrence of it. So yeah, that's kind of all the necessary background detail with that stuff, I think. Then kind of heading into what is really the long COVID phase, I would say. In February of 2023, I tried to return to exercise after kind of seeing some lingering fatigue and me trying to give my body a chance to recover and rest. That was I went for a bike ride, tried to play soccer a couple of times, but ended up kind of suffering with a really elevated heart rate that led to feeling kind of lightheaded and a bit faint and weak and needing to kind of cut back and stop that exercise. Eventually, that kind of period of trying to exercise and keep going led to a few instances where I had to kind of seek medical help. Ended up at the hospital a couple of times. I had elevated blood pressure, extreme fatigue, elevated heart rate, and feeling like I was going to pass out, and a whole list of a bunch of symptoms. Basically, what we figured out or found out from the visits to the ER was I had an elevated count of something called troponin, which is basically they test for it if there's an issue going on with your heart. Troponin is basically, from my understanding, a protein that exists in the cells, only in the cells that are in your heart. And so if they find that when they do a blood test, that means you've had some sort of trauma in your heart, that then those cells are moved outside of your heart through the rest of your body. So that was obviously a concern. The numbers weren't high enough to indicate like I'd had a heart attack or anything, but obviously being I was 35 at the time, relatively healthy individual, it was definitely a concern to see those cells. So I ended up going on some medication to lower my heart rate, lower my blood pressure, that kind of stuff. And my doctor advised I should take a week off work. I had a follow up with a cardiologist. They did an ultrasound, an EKG, and was basically given like an all clear. There was nothing physically going on with my heart that they could tell. But the cardiologist advised that I don't exceed a stress level of 6 out of 10, whatever that might mean, for up to a month, and allowed me to kind of come off of those medications. So that was kind of March, which was pretty heavy and scary. There's a lot of trauma in there. Like, obviously I go into the hospital a couple of times. One time I had to call an ambulance to come pick me up. Was not fun at all. Beyond that, through to kind of like April through May, I had some lingering fatigue, some heart rate spikes and palpitations that would happen. This continued feelings of lightheadedness and dizziness whenever I tried to, exercise or, do a bit of stuff, move a box around, deal with some stuff. And then cognitively, I was dealing with a ton of brain fog and inability to concentrate. So at that point, I implemented some breath work, trying to, calm myself down. I really took things easy, prioritized rest, tried to set some like stricter boundaries on myself, specifically at work. Like before, I was the kind of person who would quickly heat up your lunch and work at your desk and just keep going. I never really took breaks throughout the day. So I tried to, at that point, kind of make sure I was stepping outside of the office to have a bit of a lunch break, disconnecting from work a little bit and trying to get my stress levels down. I also started taking some supplements at that point recommended by my doctor, one of those being a NAD plus booster. If anybody's interested, they can look that up. I was kind of starting to do a little bit better at this point in time. And then unfortunately, as was scheduled, and I've mentioned in the podcast before, my wife, Sarah, went into surgery to have a brain tumor removed in early June. That kind of period was obviously emotionally quite stressful and scary. She spent a week in the hospital and then was at home recovering for 3 months. But that kind of initial period in the hospital was really challenging, and I think pushed me beyond what some of my energy level and fatigue limits were at the time. So after that, I really had a lot of worsening symptoms and was dealing with a lot of frustration and anxiety and depression around the whole situation. I really obviously wanted to be there and prioritize Sarah's health and recovery through that time, but was feeling so terrible myself that I think I just kept kind of like digging the hole to push through, which definitely didn't help, but was necessary, and I wouldn't necessarily change anything about that at the time. Then moving into July, I got some blood work done with my doctor. That's when I found out I had low vitamin D, B12, and testosterone, which all can lead to fatigue like symptoms. So started some supplements. I'm still taking at this point like 5,000 units of vitamin D every day. And then I've been getting a monthly B12 shot to try and boost those numbers up. And now we did a follow-up like 3-4 months later, and those numbers have rebounded a bit, but still taking those supplements. My doctor tested me for celiac because I also was developing like a unexplained rash at the time as well. But I came back negative for celiac, which is a positive. And basically at this point was the turning point where I started therapy. I was very lost, as I mentioned, super frustrated, didn't really know where to go, felt very overwhelmed in every aspect of day-to-day life, was struggling to get through work, was really feeling like all I was doing was dragging my feet, trying to get through the day to make it to the weekend, to just sleep all weekend and try and recover just to make it through the next week. And life was feeling pretty dark and grim at that point.
Do you think that it was important for you to have the diagnosis of long COVID to force you to take a break to prioritize caring for yourself? Because
Yeah.
I mean, with all of these things happening in your life, it sounds like you're being attacked from all sides. Like It's a no-brainer that you were having these negative results.
Yeah, for sure. That is something that's a really great point you bring up, because often with these kind of situations, it is very hard to get diagnosed. One of the reasons why I've always been quite cautious when it comes to COVID is my experiences with like long-standing illnesses linked to viral infections. So my sister has what's called ME for short, myalgic encephalomyelitis or something like that. It's a big word. word soup, but that is a very similar, if not the same thing as long COVID. And it took her years and years and years to get diagnosed. She's been dealing with that for a long time now. So in some ways, I was lucky with my understanding of these kind of fatigue related illnesses, I guess you could say, autoimmune response sort of things, based on the struggles that she has been through her kind of adult life. And that gave me a bit of an insight. And I think one of the positives I would say to come out of COVID that I know my sister feels is there's just a whole whack more of people in a very short amount of time now dealing with these things. So it's something doctors, there's just more information for them to read about and understand. I think they're a bit quicker to diagnose these sort of things when they come up because there's just more information to them. So there can be, and I know it is a struggle for some people to get diagnosed with long COVID if that's what they're suffering. There's not, obviously, it's one of those things you can't just do a test and be like, oh yeah, here, you tested positive for long COVID. That's not really the way it works. It's kind of if you present a whole whack of different symptoms, like if you can look it up on Google, like symptoms of long COVID, and there's one diagram that shows a little body and there's like 100 different arrows pointing at different things, like of all the different symptoms you can feel.
Other than the benefit of having a professional like a physician diagnose you as having long COVID so you can then justify your behavior and taking rest, what are some of the other benefits of an official diagnosis?
I mean, once you get an official diagnosis, that opens up the potential to work with different specialists and stuff. And so thinking specifically about dealing with that health implication, that was a big one. I sought out every specialist and every kind of person I could get my hands on through that kind of time. But then also the mental component is really big. It kind of justifies in some ways the way that you're feeling. It defines it. It gives it a name. Whereas the unknown, a lot of the time when you're suffering with symptoms that you don't understand, is the scariest part and the most frustrating part. So having a way to name it, something to call it, and something to be able to Google, that all has some big implications mentally as well.
Opens your ability to connect with the community as well. Because like you said, the ME community, being able to connect with people who have long COVID symptoms. So long COVID symptoms, people being able to, build a community and talk about what they're going through.
Exactly. I mean, for me, one of the major things I struggled with was anxiety around the health anxiety, essentially, I think they call it. There was a lot of fear related to these symptoms and how I was feeling and how it, could potentially get worse, or reliving the trauma of the really bad times. So I was definitely a bit hesitant to reach out to some of that community support at times. It's really hard when you're in the midst of it to go and, look up the subreddit for long COVID and read through what people are struggling with is terrifying. There's a movie that was, or a documentary, I guess I should say, that was put out a few years ago that I watched because it's all about ME. I believe it's called Unrest. There's a spectrum to people that deal with these illnesses, and some people it can just make your daily life a little bit more challenging, but you can essentially do everything that you can normally do. To people who basically can't get out of bed and are bedridden and have zero quality of life at all. So it's scary reading the really, really dark stuff.
Yeah. And sifting through the misinformation like any forum like Reddit.
Yeah.
What's the science behind the fact that the symptoms are persisting beyond the virus being cured, so to speak?
Yeah, so there's no, it's a little bit unknown at this point. There's a few hypotheses that are thrown around to determine what's going on. One of them is potential damage to organs, which then lead to these symptoms that are, persist for longer. One of them is essentially, my understanding of it, and this is a bit layman's terms sort of thing, but my understanding is that it doesn't clear the virus from your body or your system as it should. So then it's still the virus itself interacting with you. Or the third is that it kind of triggers an autoimmune response, which if you don't, my general understanding of what an autoimmune reaction is, it's kind of an overreaction by your immune system. Obviously, we all have an immune system. It helps prevents us from getting sick, and it's your body reacting to some sort of outside thing that's come and infected your body, and it's how it deals with and rids your body of it. But unfortunately, autoimmune issues are essentially an overreaction from, allergies are an example. And, dog, fur, whatever you come and interact, dust, whatever, those allergies are your immune system overreacting to that stimulus. That would be it's a viral infection leading to an autoimmune response that is beyond what it should be in some ways, I think, is my understanding.
That makes sense. I can poetically rationalize it in my own mind, like a trauma response. A virus comes in as a big traumatic event, and just because the virus or the trauma is removed doesn't mean those symptoms aren't going to be long lasting. Like physical abuse, you can remove yourself from that situation and be safe, but you're still going to have those that trauma and those scars going forward with you.
Totally. That's a very good, almost like metaphor or some way to like put it into something that you maybe understand a little bit easier.
I've heard people talk about depression in a similar way, like not to get too off topic, but we should do some research into that because I think there might be some new science about depression, not just being like a chemical imbalance as it's maybe typically been understood, but as the effects of trauma on the brain, like literally the trauma events physically changing the brain, physically damaging the brain.
Yeah. Interesting. That would be really good to talk about. So where was I here? Yeah. So like starting therapy. So obviously that all up until that point was just this like extreme period of a lot of really heavy stuff going on. Also at the beginning of August, like my dog Lou had to have surgery and have like a cancerous lump removed. So at that point, it really just felt like we were getting beaten down left, right, and center, and couldn't really escape all of this like heavy, negative, difficult stuff to deal with. Obviously, I leaned very heavily on support from family and then also like the medical field out there. As I mentioned, I typically, because of my regular health stuff that I deal with, I have a few different specialists and whatever that I work with. Leaning on that community as a whole made a huge difference. But going to therapy was very much changed the trajectory for me. If I hadn't have gone to therapy, I don't know where I would be now. It's kind of scary to think about. For example, one of the things that was immediately impacted was that rash that I brought up. I, had talked with my doctor about it. I had gone to the emergency room at one point about it because I was so overwhelmed with this rash and was struggling to get through the day and didn't know how to deal with it. And anything I tried wouldn't work, and went to my first therapy session and it was basically gone after that. I think it was a stress reaction. My body was in such a fight or flight, like immune response at that point in time that it was presenting itself as this rash, and just seeking that help and getting some tools to deal with how I was feeling at the time. But within that week, that rash was basically gone, which is like pretty incredible. Some of the initial things that brought me out of that state I was in, I will say now, and I'll include it in some of our clips and stuff, reach out to me like through our social channels or whatever if you want me to pass on any of this information. The next kind of few things I'll talk about, I won't gatekeep them. I'll share them with you, any files and information that I have as a starting point. But I would preface, definitely go see a therapist yourself. I'm not a professional, but I'm happy to share kind of some of the tools that worked for me. So the first one was something my therapist calls dropping anchor. And that's basically this idea that she presented to me as it was actually like an audio thing. So I have it on my phone. And if I was feeling like I was particularly overwhelmed or struggling in a moment, I can stop. And there's kind of a shorter one and a longer one that you just listen through and follow the steps. And those steps are basically, you acknowledge your thoughts and feelings, then you connect with your own body, and then you re-engage with the world. It kind of brings you out of these moments when you maybe feel like you're spiraling a little bit. And those are essentially triggered by what she called like hooked thoughts. So I tried to record a lot of that stuff as I was moving through it. But when I would start to feel overwhelmed, like me, I feel all of these symptoms and this anxiety and stuff very, very physically. I don't necessarily feel it in my mind. So it feels very strange when I start to feel all these physical symptoms. Like one of them is this like heaviness on my chest and this like pressure building in my body. Then, my mind can start racing and I have a lot of fear about, what's going on? I get chest pain. I worry, I'm having a heart attack. And it kind of spirals itself from there. So that's what we call a hooked thought. Like what was the initial trigger? And sometimes this can be really hard to figure out and define, but what was that initial trigger that then started those feelings of stress and feeling overwhelmed that then led to that kind of spiral into anxiety? And one of the ways to kind of work through and figure out how to define that is like an emotion wheel. So it's basically this little wheel that breaks down your different emotions and how they're linked. It is like, it's crazy to think, I'm feeling this specific way. I can just name it. Like, I'm feeling fear. But it took me months to be able to determine that some of the feelings I was feeling was fear. It's really strange, but when you're in the kind of depths of that brain fog and you feel like you're just living in a cloud, that step can be really challenging. So that was a big one. And then which I mentioned before in the podcast, she had me kind of align with my values. So there's like a list of 100 different things that you picked your top 10 and then put them in specific order of your values and how they align with you. So for me, like family's number one. Things that went into my top 10 were things like fun, because I really, in all the heaviness that we had dealt with throughout this last year, I couldn't think of like anything that I'd done for myself that was fun in like a long time. So, and when I thought back to myself as who I was as a person, how I've lived my life, I always kind of prioritized those fun and adventure and like doing cool things. So that was a really interesting thing, because you kind of assess your values and then you can decide how you want to align your life with those values. So when you're feeling lost or like you don't have a direction within your day, you can look at that list and think, oh, okay, I'm going to prioritize these specific things. So that was basically kind of the initial list of things that I worked through with the therapist. And yeah, as I mentioned, if you want access to any of that kind of stuff, just reach out to us on social media and I can, like a DM or whatever, and I can send some information over.
That's great.
Yeah. And take a drink.
I'm going to get something too.
That's incredible.
Hi, Lou. No barking.
I'm so sad to be leaving this girl behind for 12 days. It's going to be tough. Longest time for sure.
It's the worst part about traveling.
Yeah. I've got a rover coming daily though. It'll all be good.
Nice. That's good. Okay, jump back in. We're getting pretty close to the end now. So that kind of starting the therapy, as I say, kind of changed my direction on things and started moving towards actually improving. So from kind of like August to the present, I was dealing with a lot of those like physical symptoms through supplements and stuff and my specialist doctors. I was working through a lot of the mental health symptoms, like my health anxiety, with these, tools that I got from my therapist. And then a big thing that we worked on was acceptance. I was very much stuck in this mindset of whenever I would experience any of these symptoms or feelings, I wanted to figure out what was going on, and was leading to this kind of thought cycle in my mind where I was reliving those experiences, which I know we've talked about before on the podcast, and how your brain doesn't understand the difference between actually experiencing that trauma or reliving it. So what I was doing was just triggering all of this anxiety and this trauma response in my body because I was trying to figure out what the heck was going on all the time. So eventually reaching that level of acceptance, of understanding, like, I have an illness, I am suffering with symptoms of it, and I will one day get better. And understanding that, at this point, I'm still here, still managed to get through the year. We still had some really good times, and, it hasn't kind of totally derailed everything in my life, and just accepting it for what it is has really made a huge difference. And then the last big piece of that, which I won't get into like too much detail because I'd want to do a full pod on it, but it's EMDR, which we have talked about. But that basically helps you get down to the root of your trauma and rewire your brain to not have a negative response to that trauma, but a positive one, so that you can move on and move forward, which has been...
What does that acronym mean again?
EMDR.
Brain movement desensitization. And then I thought it was therapy, but...
Might be a response.
Response. Yeah, that makes sense.
Maybe that's it. So yeah, huge. As I say, probably we'll do your episode next when you're away in Mexico, and then maybe the one after that we can focus on EMDR or something. But that deserves a lot of attention if you're anybody that feels like you're potentially dealing with some trauma. And trauma doesn't have to be big. I mean, we all have trauma. From sometimes tiny little things can resonate and ripple through your life and impact you in ways that you don't necessarily understand. That's the kind of stuff that a therapist can get down into and help you resolve and rid yourself of some of these feelings. So would very, very much recommend that for sure. So we can dive into that in another episode.
So now when you feel that feeling in your chest, which is where I feel my anxiety as well, you acknowledge that you're feeling anxious and then move on. This feeling in my chest is anxiety. This is normal. It's going to pass. Process, move on.
Yeah,
instead
for
of
sure. That's kind of
just
that.
where we're just going from ruminating, beating a dead horse.
Yeah, that's kind of it's that dropping anchor piece. So it's kind of stopping those thoughts where they are, accepting them, understanding them, naming them is a big one. So be like, I'm just feeling anxious right now. Like even that is step one. If you want to dive into maybe why, it's like, oh, I'm feeling anxious because I know
It's Sunday.
yeah, it's Sunday and I got to go back to work tomorrow, or whatever. There's a myriad of different reasons why you could be feeling anxious. It's naming it, and then it's trying to get yourself like understanding that, spiraling about it and trying to ruminate on it and figuring out why or dealing with it or whatever is kind of not the way to go. You try to get yourself out of your mind and into your body. So
Where does self-reflection start and ruminating begin?
I think that can be a really tough one. I know I think I've mentioned it before, but I thought I was at a good relationship with my mental health because I do reflect a lot. And I always thought that was always a good thing. I think it has to do with, and it can even just be timing, and choosing the times when you do reflect, how you reflect, what you reflect on. I think it would be more positive to set specific time aside for it, maybe write things down. That's going to help you control the potential negative spiral of ruminating instead of reflecting would be probably some of my tips. I don't know. Do you find any difference?
Well, you need to acknowledge when thinking is going to find a solution or a path for progress. And I say that would be the biggest difference between self-reflection and ruminating. So ruminating by definition is that harmful thought loops just in repetition with no progress.
Yes, and that's a good thing is understanding when you don't have an answer. I was desperately trying to find an answer to this stuff, and that's where that acceptance piece comes in. Is that I don't have control over this. I don't have an answer. I have to just accept it for what it is.
And ruminating is like an ADHD symptom, whereas self-reflection is a mental health tool.
Yeah. So it can be very difficult to draw that line for sure. But I think that key is it's on things you have control over and you can find a solution is a really good, really good distinction. Yeah. So I guess all that being said about my long COVID, I think I've been able to overcome a lot. I've definitely improved in a lot of ways over the last few months. I was also lucky enough to get a big chunk of time off work to really focus on all this stuff and not have to worry about going to work every day. That made a massive difference. But I've also really prioritized this kind of getting better and working through mindfulness and these mental health practices over everything else to try and, get better as quickly as possible. Some of the continued challenges, I guess, at this point is, as I am going to be heading back to work soon, is what I was talking about, that invisible illness and that kind of misunderstanding feeling that you get of kind of people don't know really what you're going through. I find everybody probably experiences that in a little different ways. But for me, as a 36-year-old male that looks like I'm fine, is people might not necessarily understand why I can't just go unload that pallet of wine at work, because that'll totally derail the rest of my day. One of the things that I suffer with the fatigue and stuff of long COVID is you get this thing called post-exertion malaise, where maybe at this point I'm beyond the skyrocketing heart rate and heart palpitations and lightheadedness and dizziness and feeling like I'm going to faint that I would have experienced if I was doing a bit of physical activity before. But it is this understanding that if I do push myself physically, you kind of have this energy debt that then you have to recover, and you can really struggle with that kind of extreme fatigue for the next day or 2 days after or whatever, where it becomes a really big challenge. So that's something that, maybe a little bit nervous about, just heading back into those situations where somebody's like, hey man, can you help me with this box? And you're like, sure, but I don't want to. That for sure is like a continued challenge. As I mentioned, just like the fatigue and that dealing with that, planning out your day, the routine, whatever, the different things that you can do to try and mitigate that. And then obviously just fitting with all of these things, trying to fit into this, rise and grind culture of our capitalist world of, in order to get by and succeed and make money and survive and exist and thrive or whatever, it's really pushed to get up early, work really, really hard, push yourself beyond your boundaries, ignore that like work-life balance and just work harder and longer, skip that meal, don't take a break, all of these things that you feel like pressure to do within, your standard work day and just in life, that is probably the most difficult piece that I'm going to have to figure out going forward, is maintaining those boundaries and that balance, and hoping that I've already experienced some like amazing understanding at work, and just hoping that that can continue as I continue to try and move through this,
Yeah, that is going to be your biggest challenge for sure,
Mm-hmm.
man. And my biggest takeaway from this today is really, once again, hammering home that a concept of giving our neighbor grace, and you don't know what everyone is struggling with, especially behind the scenes, hidden illness. So yeah, myself, I 100% want to acknowledge that I would be a little bit guilty of maybe chirping that friend of mine, Dev, who can't help me put away that um, pallet of wine. I have to acknowledge how privileged and fortunate I am to be so far physically indestructible. Yeah, but
Yeah,
really giving grace, and yeah,
totally, man.
yeah,
It's really
again,
big. Changed the
I
way
hear you loud and clear.
it changed the way I look at the world. Obviously, I had, as I mentioned, like my sister dealing with ME for the last, I don't know, 15, 20 years, however long it's been now. Um, and seeing her struggles and what she's gone through. I definitely had a little bit of that perspective before, but having experienced it yourself is just different. And there's just so many different things out there. You really don't know what other people are going through. So giving them the benefit of the doubt and a bit of grace, and seeing the positive maybe in what they're doing. They're not making a decision to negatively impact you, looking at the world in a more positive way. Yeah, those are all good takeaways.
Yeah, absolutely.
I will jump in like super, super briefly just into some very quick statistics, because one of the things that I think is important to understand in that point that you were making, that some of the initial numbers indicate that like 6 to 7% of people with a COVID infection will suffer with long COVID. So when you think about it at this point, like, who do you know that absolutely has not have had COVID? That's a very small amount of people. So if you're talking like 6, 7%, those are people that have been diagnosed. Like maybe the real number is closer to 10%. You think about that percentage of people in the world or our country or whatever that are struggling with similar things that I am. That's a really important thing to be aware of. It's interesting. I've even noticed it on social media a little bit, people sharing their own stories of their struggles over the last couple of years. And I'm looking at some of this stuff and being like, that's long COVID for sure. And maybe they're not
Yeah,
mentioning it. Maybe they don't know, but that I was like, you can just, having experienced it, I can tell.
yeah, dude. Something's definitely, like, not to dip my toes into conspiracy theorist waters here to undermine everything you've just told us, but the 30-year-olds in my life that are having issues with their heart post-COVID and post-vaccine, there's something skewing the data.
Percent, man. And I think it's that no matter what it is, I think it can be both of those things can be true. Like we've talked about, right? That superposition. It's not just the virus itself. It's not just the vaccine. Different things work for different people. It can likely be both. And I think it's just, the one thing that I would say as well, that I didn't understand what I was going through at first. When I was suffering with the fatigue and I was trying to get through my days and I was feeling tired all the time, I didn't understand what was happening. I think if you are feeling any kind of symptoms that don't feel normal, like seek out a doctor, seek out some help. You might not know if there's an underlying condition. I saw it as well with Sarah and her eventual diagnosis with a brain tumor. Sometimes it can be these small little things that become an indicator of something bigger and more important going on. So
Good point.
definitely don't just like take our word for it and work through some of this stuff yourself. Like, as we mentioned before, we're
Yeah,
definitely not professionals. We're just here trying to build a community and be open and vulnerable about the things that we go through in life, and hopefully that can influence some people to make some
exactly.
better decisions in their lives. So yeah.
And on that note, I want to personally apologize for being patient zero, bringing COVID-19 Canada.
Very well could have been.
The sickest I've ever been in my life that January 2020, returning from the north of Italy, but
Mm-hmm.
everyone's got a patient zero story like that.
Yeah, dude. I mean, for me, when I was saying initially like that March of 2020, where when I suspect that I had COVID, was immediately following Vancouver Wine Fest and going and like shaking a bunch of Italian winemakers' hands and stuff as like Italy was just blowing up. Um, Probably looking back now, not the smartest thing in the world. Hindsight's 2020.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There were some positives that came out of it. It caused a real estate crash in Saskatchewan that cost me $100,000, but
oh, damn, dude. Yeah, and I think that's one of the things. It's has been very easy for me to look back on 2024 and see it as very dark and difficult and sad, and that there was like nothing good in it. But as I mentioned the other day, I was kind of scrolling through the photos on my phone over the last year and realizing that even though the vast majority of it was very, very challenging, I do think we were able to make the most of it. And now that I've started this mental health journey and I'm working with a therapist, I know I'm going to be long-term in such a better place to be a good member of society and a good husband, a good friend, a good family member, all that kind of stuff. So,
better late than never.
mm-hmm.
Never late is better. Never better.
Cool. Anything more about that before we jump into our weekly affirmations? You asked some really great questions, but I'm sorry, I know you didn't get much chance to chime in.
No. That was good. That was great. Like I said, really, my takeaway from that is be more compassionate. You never know what, the person next to you is going through.
Mm-hmm.
Could be long COVID, could be anything.
Totally, man. Cool. Weekly affirmations. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay. Well, I'll start us off with something that I'm grateful for. So
Before we do that, let's do our review of our goal for the last week that ended up being like the last 3 weeks or something.
Yeah. Definitely. So on the topic when I switched gears and talked about the effects of cold and flu on mental health, I talked about how, again, that word compassionate, showing some compassion for yourself and not pushing yourself too much in times of sickness. And then to follow that up, I immediately set my goal as going to the gym every day from that day until my vacation. So I reflected on the hypocrisy there a little bit, but overall it was great. And I definitely increased my gym attendance from then to now. I think I just missed Christmas Day and one other day. So pretty good.
Oh, dude, that's still huge. Yeah, mine was to give that microdosing a go, which I was excited for and very hopeful. Unfortunately, it definitely did not work for me. I had a really, really horrible day when I tried it. I did kind of suspect this might happen because unfortunately I am allergic to mushrooms a little bit. Oh. So instead of being like an entirely positive experience, I think it sets off a immune sort of response in my body. And just unfortunately isn't going to work for me. I think if you're interested, I can share the now 2 packages I have with you.
Why not? If you want them. I'll eat them all at once.
There was definitely it was maybe just a bad day as well because I chose to try it on a day that I was very fatigued, and Sarah tried it as well, so that I kind of had like a bit of a control sample or whatever to see how she was feeling. It gave both of us like a very jittery energy, almost like you had too much caffeine or like a Red Bull or something, which when my body was very fatigued and telling me to rest, to then have like an underlying thing pushing my body to move a little bit more, just kind of set off my anxiety, which was unfortunate.
And these are at microdose levels, like you just took 1 or 2 of these tiny little caps.
Yeah, I just took one time. I think it's like a 25 milligrams or something. But what I did notice was a lingering for a few days afterwards, increased concentration levels. This was like just before Christmas, and then we went up to Sarah's family's place and did some puzzles and played Monopoly and stuff, and I was hyper focused for that whole time. I've always struggled with eventually like not giving a shit about a puzzle when I'm working on it. It's like fun for the first few minutes, and then I'm like, no, I don't care about this anymore because it doesn't matter. But I was like in the zone the entire time. So I could see it definitely working for somebody that's struggling with some concentration, maybe some like ADHD type stuff.
Very cool. I want to find a healthy intake method of nicotine for periods of like intense learning. If I want to sit down to some new subject matter that I really want to absorb and process, apparently nicotine helps activate this, I don't know, maybe it was like something called andesine that enables neuroplasticity and helps for learning. Apparently lots of brilliant scientists out there are using nicotine.
Maybe just like the gum or a patch or something. Yeah.
The gum or the Zins, the little lippers or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Give it a try.
Yeah. Cool. Grateful for. What are you grateful for, my friend?
Yes. So shout out to my homies, the Wright brothers. I'm grateful for the invention of flights. The fact that I can hop on this big birdie in the sky tomorrow and fly to Mexico. Pretty amazing.
That is pretty amazing. Flight is incredible.
Yeah. Where do you think flight will be in 20 years from now? One quick, succinct
Where do I think
prediction.
flight will be? I think high-speed rail will be the most common means of transport instead of flight. I hope, anyway.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. All
More
right.
environmentally friendly. Yeah, I mean, to me, train transport is like the transport of the people, man. It's what we should all want. You don't need to buy a car to get around. You can just hop on cheap, affordable public transit and get to where you're going. How amazing would a high-speed rail between here and Vancouver be? And then I could just hop on the ferry and I would visit you. I didn't have to jump in my car and drive across the scary mountain passes.
So we talking like Cloud City, Lando Calrissian, high-speed rail in the sky? That would be pretty sweet. Because like it's pretty fucking busy down on the ground with all of the bike lanes to fit a high-speed rail in.
I think underground, vacuum underground
Definitely.
tunnel, high-speed rail. That'd be sick.
Like that all the celebrities used to get around Los Angeles with the special black Starbuckses in the underground.
Yeah, what do they call it? The celebrity bond or something? The celeb bond?
Yeah.
I saw
I
that.
don't know.
I saw that conspiracy theory on TikTok.
Celebrimbor? Yeah. Help Sauron forge the One Ring.
Yeah. Yeah. Rings of power. Okay, I am grateful for, I wrote friends who show up in small ways. I'm specifically referring to a few of my friends that I don't see very regularly. They're kind of from, past lives sort of thing that still show up, whether it's just on social media or reaching out, commenting on small things. Maintaining that connection and communication is so nice. And so I'm so thankful for it. There's definitely been times when I was more dedicated to the grind than that those little things didn't mean as much to me. If anything, they could edge on a bit of like annoyance, like, oh, I don't want to have this conversation because I'm busy. And that was such a backwards way of thinking. So specific reference to a few friends out there that have been showing up for me in small ways lately. And I'm very, very grateful for that.
Yeah, good point, man. And I couldn't agree more. I got a random DM from a guy that I played soccer with when we were teenagers. And he was just like, hey, I bumped into another buddy that you're currently playing soccer with. We went to a West Ham game. Do you remember when we went to Sweden when we were 15 and how much fun that was? And yeah, like he is a super busy guy, just like me, didn't need to write me. We hadn't talked in 15 years, but it was great. Quick little exchange, took 10 minutes out of both of our days and made us feel positive. And yeah, connection is powerful.
Totally,
I agree
man.
with you. That's awesome.
Yeah, and supporting your friends and what they're doing in their endeavors, right? It's kind of going back to that point again, is like you don't really know what people are going through or like what's happening in their internal lives. And yeah, supporting whatever like small little things that they're working on. For us, obviously, we've got the podcast. I've got some friends who are, putting music out there or doing different things, and supporting that is so great. It's what builds community. It's what makes life worth living.
Yeah, dude, totally. On that point, I'll give a quick little shout out to Trevor, who started this really cool business called Dogged. I just messaged him yesterday because I want him to create some dog wipes. Alba has like bare skin on her belly and around her like pits and stuff. And whenever we go out walking, it gets so muddy and then eventually irritates her skin. But, you can't do daily baths. One, nobody has the time for that. And two, that's not good for their skin and essential oils and shit either. So dog wipes.
Cool. So it's all like dog stuff, obviously.
His company, Dogged, is all dog stuff. And he's just started to create a few of their own proprietary products. I think right now it's the dog bowls that make it more difficult for your dog to eat quickly. The enrichment, slow feeders is what they're called. Yeah. Super cool.
Sweet. That's amazing. Cool. Moment of awe.
Yeah. So as I wrote this, I realized that a lot of my moment of awes are baby related. Babies on the brain, but Dylan celebrated his 32nd yesterday. And the day before that, we met up for a hike, went down to the beach. A couple of our friends, Armand, Mike, Dylan, and I. And it was a really stark difference celebrating this birthday in comparison to last year's. One, he has a freaking daughter there, insane, did the same thing. We did our 10-kilometer hike down to the beach with a jet boil and coffees and music. And we got him some Pokemon cards as a gift. But then his freaking 6-month-old baby's there just chilling. And I don't know. I thought it was pretty awesome, pretty awe-inspiring, pretty cool. Babies are cool. I'm really happy for him.
That is, yeah, it's so cool. I'm very happy for them too. I haven't seen them in a long time, but hopefully when I make it out there next, I'll get to see the little baby.
Yeah, dude, he just like on a picnic bench in the rainy January 4th day did a diaper change.
Wow.
It's like just dad all of a sudden.
Yeah, man, that's so cool.
Yeah, from drugs to dad in 1 year, birthdays.
Yeah, the last time I saw him, he was wearing a like safari style vest with lots of different pockets on it, and each pocket was designated to like a different type of drug, because we were at a music festival and he's like, oh, this is where I keep this one, this is where I keep this one, blah blah blah. I remember my sister just being like, who the hell is this guy? I'm like, oh yeah, he's a kindergarten teacher.
Yeah. Now this is where I keep the diapers. This is where I keep I don't know, my Pokemon cards that I trade with the students at school and rip them off.
Oh, that's amazing. So cool.
Yeah.
My moment of awe, I'm going to be honest here, it was difficult to think of one. We haven't been doing too much here lately, which has been nice. We've had very, very quiet holidays, puzzles, movies, reading books, getting our like life organized for the new year and things like that. And it's been super gray and dark and gloomy. So nothing really jumped out at me initially. But the one thing I did remember that I ended up talking with Sarah about is this kind of what I feel is a collective societal desire to slow down and abandon hustle culture. From what I've seen we obviously did our ins and outs last week, and I've seen a lot of them. It's definitely become a bit of a trend. I've seen a lot of them posted on social media and stuff. And one of the consistent things across the board is that kind of rejection of hustle culture and finding ways to slow down and support our mental health and our nervous systems and stuff like that. That was a bit of a moment of awe of seeing that as being a wider spread movement, which I think is really great and I'm excited about.
I absolutely agree. I have something that I want to say about that, but I have to be back in 1 second.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I saw that post that you shared about like that Scandinavian concept of completely shutting down and hibernating in the winter. It was like a nice, like romantic picture. I'm not sure if all of it was, factual, but
yeah,
it made me.
It doesn't seem all real, but whatever.
And then I've also agree with you that I've seen that shared phenomenon of people similarly wanting to pull back a little bit. And I'm wondering if that's everyone and all demographics, or if it's just particularly ours, and if it's particularly the lens in which the algorithm is pushing us media, maybe because we're the first generation that's going to earn less than our parents, and just this shared exasperated sigh of defeat. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense in the current climate of the world, specifically for us millennials. And I don't think it's necessarily the algorithm, because I'm seeing it from people I know that are part of my wider circle. It's not just, your free For You page deciding what you should see and what you shouldn't see. And it's definitely, yeah, it's discussed more, kind of what I was talking about last week of like kind of like old people hobbies and doing gardening and bird watching or whatever, those sort of things. The more I like talk to different people, more people are seeking out those sort of activities and prioritizing their time in a different way. And I think we're just sick of the grind and starting to understand that a lot of this stuff that we spend our time doing, whether it's social media or whatever, is meaningless and brings us no joy.
Yeah.
And seeking out, things from our childhood that feel real, like, being out in the world and nature and less of this digital world.
And sick of the grind, but why? Sick of the grind because this deal, this contract that we've chosen to participate in, we're getting ripped off. And I think more people are starting to open their eyes up to that.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. The odds are stacked against us. The deck's rigged. Yeah. So
So on days when you're really smacked in the face with that reality, what do you do to snap yourself out of it and boost your mood? We talked about listening to tunes in this podcast. What else?
For me, a big one, as I mentioned, it's been so gray here. For me, it's just getting out in the sunshine. Outside was the first word I ever said before mom or dad. I was like standing at the back door, banging on the door, yelling outside, outside, because I wanted to go outside. And that theme is very much continued for me through the rest of my life. And it's just absorbing the sunlight, vitamin D. The other day, I was kind of having a semi-depressing thought, thinking about how I've enjoyed photography very much as a hobby lately. And I was thinking about photography and how sometimes a beautiful picture isn't taking a picture of a specific thing. You're basically just capturing the light. Like that's what photography is. It's a device that captures the light and shows it to you at a different time. And that's the beauty of it. And I was feeling particularly down about how gray and the fact that we haven't had any light here whatsoever in so long, and thinking like that's why the world doesn't feel as magical and as beautiful right now. So my mood booster is the sun. And so what I want to do, because the one thing, we get this thing here in the Okanagan where obviously we sit in a valley and then you get this inversion cloud and the cloud sits and it's kind of like putting a lid on a pot, and you just get this gray cloud that sits there and it's super low. And it's just endlessly dark. It's horrible. But the one like shining light of this whole thing is you can actually like drive up the mountains and get above the cloud on the right day. So I'm going to make a point to watch the webcams up on the ski hill. And if it's sunny up there and dark down here, I'm getting in my car and I'm driving up there and going to get some light. So yeah, that's my mood booster.
That's amazing. Obviously the sun is a mood booster. There's some science behind that, but I feel it so much, especially when the weather changes after winter here. Like you just are smiling and you got that extra skip in your step and you don't know why until you realize,
Man,
yeah, we haven't seen the sun in months.
My favorite weekend of the year is always when the Masters is on. It's like April. It always tends to be like the first weekend of the year where you can like open up the windows and the sun's out and the birds are chirping, things are starting to grow. It just feels like the start of the world coming alive again. And
yes, dude.
Yeah.
I'm glad that you brought up golf, because this is my good chance to remind you, and unfortunately not our listeners, because if you're listening to this and you didn't watch the premiere of TGL Golf League tonight on ESPN, then you missed out and you'll have to watch it next week. So yeah, today is January 6th, so 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on ESPN. Tune in. I'm excited. It's going to be fun.
Where can we watch it? Is it?
Well, I have ESPN.
You have ESPN? Okay.
Yeah.
It's like a TV channel. I'll have to look into that.
Yeah. It's a TV channel. My grandma's a big sports fan, so she's got every sports channel.
Nice. I probably got it somewhere there too.
Yeah. Do you still have your cross-country skis? Is that a physical activity that your old body could handle?
That would be a bit extreme. Cross-country skiing is, because I got the skate skis too, it's like a pretty high intensity actually. So that wouldn't be great for me right now, but that's not a bad idea. Though snowshoeing would be one that I think I could do at this point, but it's really hard with that fatigue, man. You walk a fine line of, yeah, you can go do something really nice, but then you end up with that post-fatigue malaise, which is just so brutal. So one of the things I'm struggling with right now is finding that right balance of activity to rest without like pushing it too hard.
Well, it sounds like golf worked really well for that.
Golf was great for sure, and we really went for it too. But I think luckily I was pretty recharged at that point in time and didn't have to do anything else outside of just doing that.
Yeah. I price set a few golf courses to play in Puerto Vallarta next week, and it's really cool to see like these luxury courses that'll be like $600 a round in the morning, and then after 1 p.m. the price goes down to like a tenth of that because it'll be over 30 degrees. But to be honest, the weather there next week's only like 25, so I'll be just fine.
Nice. That's it.
Yeah. My mood booster is hanging out with my dog Alba. That's mainly going on walks, mainly doing it outside, but it's not mainly in the sun because we only get the sun here for a few months.
Yeah.
If the sun is part of that equation, then it's just
even better.
Through the roof. Music on, tossing the ball. Alba is just exudes positivity. Dogs are, what's that word? Unconditional love, and boost my mood always, even when she pisses me off and does something that she's not supposed to be doing.
100%.
Okay, almost wrapping up here.
Yeah, what's your goal of the week? You're about to head off on vacay, so what do you got?
Yeah, so I was thinking about all sorts of things because I knew that my goal here would have to be vacation related. Another thing that I've just been noticing in my life lately that I want to improve upon is managing my frustration. Like I've been noticing that minor trivial things I've been giving too much of my energy towards them. Like honestly, silly things like somebody doing something stupid on the road, like a traffic infraction. Somebody who loves me just asking me too many questions just out of love. Like, I mean, I'm not reacting poorly outwardly necessarily, but inside, I'm almost getting that clenched jaw that I
Yeah.
have like horrific memories of seeing on my dad and just like the frustrated voice.
Yeah.
And I just want to work on handling that better or
Yeah.
processing it better or not letting that get me so worked up.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And if there's any time that I need to practice that, be zen, be mindful, be peaceful, it's when I'm about to spend a week with my fucking family. Holy smokes. And a week where I'm allowing myself the ability to partake in the consumption of alcohol, should I so choose. So,
Right. Yeah, that's big.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's a good one.
Not managing your frustration and being drunk at the same time. Holy smokes. That would not be good. That would set us back.
Yeah, I sympathize with that for sure. I spent a few days this last week. I posted about it, but I did a little like rebrand and refresh of Sarah's website for her. We've been talking about it for ages. I got a little start on it a while ago and then decided to just bite the bullet and finish it off while we had the time before I get back to work here. And there's nothing that annoys me more, kind of like the things you were talking about driving. I definitely noticed having like driving with you, other people on the road have always annoyed you. For me, it's like a computer moving too slowly or like the internet connection, like moving too slow. You want to do things quicker and get it done and you're waiting for pages to load. Oh my God, man. That I find that so incredibly frustrating.
I agree. Airport security, delayed flights, serenity now, serenity now.
It's one thing that I've worked on a lot, and it's not always necessarily frustration for me. It's more like anxiety, and I really don't like going into big, busy grocery stores. Like Costco is typically like my worst nightmare. But I've found moments of zen within that. I try to reframe it and look at things that I do like within that same scenario. So I do like people watching. So I've tried to reframe my Costco experience to an opportunity to people watch and not get frustrated. The fact that people are crisscrossing, walking all over the place, and you can never move as fast as you want, and instead just not rush and take the time to kind of just enjoy looking at all the weird people out there. So
great point and great tip. What is frustration? Is that not just an outward reflection of anxiety, maybe?
they're for sure related. That would be a good thing to look up on the emotion wheel that I was talking about earlier. That
Yeah.
sometimes can be interesting to
Or
see where it fits in on the wheel.
ask ChatGPT.
Or just ask our AI overlords. My goal of the week, which this process in writing down my experiences for this podcast has been a good starting point, but I want to do a review of all of my therapy notes and points and things before I head back to work mid next week. I'm feeling in a good space and like I have lots of good tools. So I want to do a bit of a review of all the different things that I've worked on. It can be a helpful little reminder. Sometimes the smallest detail of something that you wrote down somewhere will trigger a memory that can be helpful again. So that's my goal of the week. I want to make sure I do that and set myself up for success.
That's a great one. And it's going to be difficult for us to keep this going with you returning to work, me having almost 2 weeks in Mexico. But in 2025, we are committing to being committed. And where there's a will, there's a way. We're going to work on our time management. We're going to work on our preparation. But above all else, we're just going to commit.
Yeah, unfortunately, it will mean recording in the dark in the evenings. So it's been nice to do it during the day when the sun's out.
Yeah, and when our energy levels are a little higher, but that's okay. Might open a whole new dynamic.
Yeah, I get a bit of an energy rebound in the evening, so I think I'll be okay.
I do too around 1 a.m. How's that sound?
It's super ideal timing.
Yeah, cool. Sweet. Awesome, man. Well, yeah, we got our work cut out for us here, and I'll talk to you next week with some sunny palm trees in the backdrop and we should definitely reminisce on a few of the stories of the amazing times you and I have had in Mexico together too. I think that the listeners would get a good kick out of that.
That would be amazing. Very fun. I hope you have a really fantastic trip and that you don't miss Alba too much. Yeah. Soak up that sun for me.
Thanks so much, man. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.